Program does not necessarily reflect the opinions and viewpoints of the staff and management of this station.
Welcome to the wonderful world of seniors, the best of all worlds. You now have the time, resources, and ability to enjoy what you have worked for all your life. So let's explore the many possibilities available to seniors on Senior World Radio. Senior World Radio is your source for senior citizens-related topics, information, and entertainment. Now, here is your host of Senior World Radio, Glenn Howard.
It's been said that freedom is not free, but is paid for with the blood of those who fought for us. As we've been looking around for incredible seniors, I discovered a gentleman who is a senior air traffic controller, or was retired. I was very impressed with him because I'd seen a video from San Antonio about the Air Force combat controllers, and was very impressed with these guys who are known as the silent professionals. I think all of us have heard about the Army Rangers and the Navy SEALs, but I personally had not heard that much. In fact, I hadn't heard about air traffic combat controllers until I got a chance to meet a gentleman by the name of Don Crosson. Don is Chief Master Sergeant Don Crosson, retired, who, as I visited with him, began to share with me some of his experiences, and I said, wow, that's interesting. I invited him to come in and get a chance to visit with us, and he's right here in the studio. Don, welcome to the show. Glad to have you join me.
Thank you, Glenn. I'm proud to be here.
When I look at what our men have done, in fact, I was so pleased that you showed me some of the pictures of people that you had worked with and places you had been. Good night. You've been literally all over the world: Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, El Salvador, Dominican Republic, you name it. I think you've been there. But it was really very interesting to me to discover the kind of price that you guys pay and the things you do to make it possible for us to enjoy the freedom that we've got. First of all, how long have you been out of the military?
About 32 years.
Okay, so your memories go back to an earlier period, and maybe that's a reason why you're willing to talk to me. Some of the military guys I talk to don't like to tell that much about what they did, but after a few years, I think people need to hear and know the stories and be able to appreciate what you guys have done. First of all, let's begin by just telling me a little bit about what is an Air Force combat controller.
Glenn, a combat control team member, is an individual who goes through about 3 years of training before he becomes what they call a combat-ready controller. In the early years, in the years when I went into the combat control teams, they drew us out of the air traffic control field. I had been rated as an air traffic controller in 1955. I was the youngest air traffic controller at that point to be assigned to an air traffic control center in Cleveland, Ohio. That was before they had radar in the civilian air traffic control facilities. I lied about my age at age 16. I went into the Air Force. I was 17 years old when I was assigned to that facility.
Wow.
They caught me and was going to put me out of the service. But the colonel, Colonel Hensey was my boss, said that if my parents had signed the release, they'd let me stay. Well, I told them they didn't want me back home, so they signed a release and I stayed. I spent almost 11 years as an air traffic controller doing control tower work, radar approach control, ground controlled approach. I was rated in all the facilities that they had at the time. When I decided to go into the combat control phase, which was at that time a special duty assignment and still is today. The team started in 1953, believe it or not, and they had their berets well ahead of the Army Special Forces berets and so forth. I went into combat control in 1964. I stayed 11 years on the teams. In those 11 years, I became master parachutist. I was Halo qualified, high altitude, low opening deployment. I was blessed with having been on the teams that tested some of those procedures on how to get into denied areas from a high altitude. We would jump out of an airplane at altitudes as high as 25,000 feet and free fall with oxygen to opening altitude into a denied area. The object was to keep a small fighting unit together, to land together on the ground as a fighting unit and be able to complete a mission. So we did those things.
Well, now, when you talk about air traffic controllers, of course, most of us have an image of a guy sitting in a tower someplace in front of a bunch of computers in a rather nice, comfortable situation. It sounds to me like what you guys were doing was a whole different ballpark, and instead of a control tower, you controlled from, combat zones?
Yes, sir. We would go in and set up drop zones and landing zones, recon an area for appropriate places to be able to bring in assault aircraft. Generally speaking, if you had a large Army assault, airborne assault, you'd have combat controllers in ahead of them. And the combat controllers would actually go in, recon the area, and set up drop zones for the Army forces to come in. Many of our teams today will deploy into places like Afghanistan and Iraq, well ahead of conventional forces, make contact with friendly forces on the ground and set up communications and navigational aids and call airstrikes when needed for friendly forces to protect them. And in offensive operations, our teams are inserted with Navy SEAL teams at times, sometimes inserted with Army Special Forces. Many operations require a couple of combat controllers to be assigned to a Army Special Forces team. And because of the unique talents and skills of these combat controllers, these men provide the air cover and the air support that they need to support the ground forces.
The video I saw that was produced in San Antonio about the training program indicates that there's a very high, well, I wouldn't call it a dropout rate, but the number of people who actually come through and are able to qualify for this type of a service is a very small minority. Apparently the training is not only rigorous, but extremely, it's more than demanding. It requires people with incredible skills and understanding, because you're actually going into enemy territory at the very front of the battle, are you not?
Yes, sir, that's correct. The attrition rate going through the schools today is probably 45 or 50% dropout rate. And the length of time for the complete training, as I stated earlier, is about 3 years. So it's pretty strenuous. We get in the initial stages, before we had our own school set up and so forth, we would go to school with Army Special Forces school, Navy SEAL schools, Marine Recon. We'd pick and choose those parts and phases of those schools that we needed, and they in turn would use our skills coincidental with their operations. So it was a team effort. It worked very well. I give a lot of credit to the other special operations teams and the other service. I have a lot of respect for them. They're every bit as tough as the media professes they are. But the combat controllers choose to be in the background, and I like the term silent warriors.
Talk a little bit about the emotion that you experience when you're getting ready to go into something like this. You realize you're going into enemy lines. You have no questions about if you get caught, you're in really deep trouble. How do you prepare for it? What kind of a process do you go through to be able to deal with the impending tragedies that you may be facing?
Glenn, sometimes the missions don't require going into enemy territory. It requires going into disaster areas.
Okay.
You have combat controllers. If you recall the earthquakes in Central America back in the mid 70s, we had combat control teams in on those to set up landing zones to bring in resupplies and take out casualties. You had the incidents of the gentleman where they drank the Kool-Aid and killed so many people. Their own people.
Jim Jones
experience.
Yes.
Combat controllers were the first people in there.
Really?
And set up the operation to bring in folks to tend to any survivors. Of course, there were none, but to remove the bodies and clean up the mess down there. In the combat operations, there were times when we'd go into seclusion for a period of time before a mission actually took place. You'd go into seclusion to study the plan, the operation, to study the enemy activities, practice the team efforts. Each man has a job, and each man has to be able to take over the other man's job. Generally, combat controllers will deploy in teams of no less than 2, generally 12 to 24 men. In my day, today it may have changed a little bit, after 32 years of retirement. But you'd go into seclusion and you'd practice the operation over and over till you get it down perfect. And, of course, you have to set everything aside. You forget about family ties, outside communication, et cetera, et cetera. And many times you go in at 3 weeks or so before the operation takes place, and that's when you separate from your family. And the next time they see you is when the mission's over and you come back home. I can recall a time in mid-'60s when we went to the Dominican Republic. I got a call at 2 o'clock in the morning, and before 4 a.m. we were on our way to Dominican Republic. Family didn't see me for 6 weeks. Had no idea where we were except what they got from the news. And, of course, they knew, but there was no official statement made that we were there.
Wow. I'm Glenn Howard, Senior World Radio, visiting today with Chief Master Sergeant Don Crosson, retired. A gentleman who was involved with the senior air traffic controllers, people who have paid the price to make it possible for us to enjoy the freedoms we got, and quite a price they have paid. You may have somebody that you'd like to recommend as an incredible senior for us to interview. If you do, I wish you'd give me a call at 877-875-0990, because we enjoy talking to these guys and gals who have interesting experiences and can share them with us on radio. So give me a call, recommend them to me, let me get in touch with them. Don, we got to take a break. We're going to be coming right back in just a few moments, so please don't go away.
You're nobody till somebody loves you.
Have you ever had a problem, but it seemed like there was no one who could help? You spent hours calling around, being referred from one place to the next. Well, not anymore. I want to tell you about a free and easy-to-use service in Oklahoma. 211 is a simple 3-digit phone number to get help or to give help when you don't know where to turn. Dialing 211 only takes a minute, and you are connected with a caring Oklahoman who will help you find the assistance you've been looking for. With access to over 13,000 programs, Heartline 211 can connect you to local resources for many different needs, including health care, food, counseling, rent assistance, disability assistance, job services, and much more. 211 is a service of Heartline, a United Way partner agency. 211, the right first call to get help or give help 24 hours a day.
Hi, my name's Jason Ledlow, president of UT Phone, the ultimate telephone service. We're proud to be a sponsor of Senior World Radio with Glenn Howard. UT Phone is dedicated to providing Oklahomans affordable telephone service all across our great state. We have Lifeline home phone service starting at just $1.95. That's right, just $1.95, and most of Oklahoma's seniors qualify for this reduced home phone service. They get to keep their old home phone number, and it even includes long distance. Another great feature of UT Phone's customers really like is that it includes repair service. That's right, any repairs at no additional charge. With many telephone services charging $40 to $50 per month, it makes sense to switch your service to UT Phone. This service is a federal program that is provided through the Universal Service Fund. There is only one per household, so make it UT Phone's home phone service for $1.95. Give us a call at 800-996-0098. Again, call 800-996-0098.
I've made up my mind.
Welcome back to Senior World Radio. I'm Glenn Howard, visiting today with Chief Master Sergeant Don Crosson, retired. Don was an Air Force combat controller who had some interesting experiences. The last segment talking about some of his experiences going into enemy territory as well as disaster areas where there is no nice runway, no great control tower, none of the wonderful facilities, and yet they put together a system to provide the jobs and do the jobs that are necessary to do. But Don, you were talking earlier about your experiences in Vietnam. You know, there's been a lot of criticism of Vietnam, and I think Americans have failed to appreciate what our soldiers did in Vietnam. They fought a very difficult war and came home, in my opinion, as heroes. But as one who has experienced that, come back, how did you deal with the whole Vietnam situation in your own mind?
Glenn, it was, in some ways, it was an elating event in my life because you as a combat controller or as any special operations team member in any of the branches of services, you train for that particular time when you go into combat. And you psych yourself up. You're built up to the point of being on the attack, being a warrior, if you will, and going in to do a duty. So a combat controller or a special operations member may go for years, 3 or 4 or 5 years before he even smells combat. But it's a period of time of intense training and physical and mental stress, building up. You know, you have long periods of time of tranquility, if you will, in building up to the event of 3 minutes or 4 minutes of complete terror and intense, operation, if you will, and that's an everyday event when you're in a combat area. We would rotate teams out of Tan Son Nhut, and we worked all 4 corps of Vietnam. Every part of Vietnam, combat controllers were on the ground at one time or another, including Laos and Cambodia. We would rotate in teams of 4 to 5 to 6 men to the various locations and come back to Tan Son Nhut, spend 24 hours in recuperation and rest, and then back out to the field again. It was seldom that we'd get 2 or 3 days back at our home base. We had 36 men in country to cover the entire country at that time. And it was quite an operation. I was very proud of our team. Our team did very well.
When you came home, though, the Americans were not really supportive and appreciative of the Vietnamese, the soldiers that went to Vietnam.
No, they weren't.
How did you deal with that?
Oh, I dealt with it with anger sometimes, sometimes with extreme remorse that our people would treat our men coming home the way they did. Sometimes a returning member would be driven to the point of violence. And there were several occasions when I was involved in these types of things. It was not pleasant, and it angers me today to think that the American people would treat their military that way. It was disgusting for me. And I'm very pleased to see today the emphasis on the military and the things that they do and the sacrifices that they have. But I'd like to point out that the same generation that spit on us coming back from Vietnam, threw rocks at us, and did unspeakable things to our people coming back, have sons and daughters that are serving today. And they're treating them coming back as the heroes that they are. So it's kind of ironic in some ways to me. And that's the way I see the overall picture. But I've never lost the pride in service and the pride of our members that served. My wife, Debbie, served 6 years active duty. That's where I met her in the service. I've been married to her for 40 years. Her service, though it was in a safe zone, if you will, she saw no combat, but every minute of her service was done during a wartime period. And she was as subject to going to combat as I was, to being sent to Vietnam or to somewhere where there was danger. Yet she served honorably and and voluntarily.
Don, one of the things that's impressed me about you, though, is the way since having retired, you have become very involved in working with organizations trying to affect government policies, laws. I know you've been out at the Oklahoma State Capitol talking to a lot of our members of the House of Representatives and Senate. Do you think the attitudes that you experienced coming back from Vietnam has been kind of a motivator in this? And tell us a little bit about the kind of things that you are currently doing in trying to continue the war that you were involved in back so many years ago.
Glenn, the war I was involved in was a hands-on, physical, face-to-face war. You could see an enemy. You could face the enemy. Today, we face an enemy that's much more sophisticated. They are clandestine, and they are operating from within our own walls. With that type of an operation, I look at it as I would have seen it as a military active duty member in special operations. I see this enemy force as every bit an insurgent, as though they were an enemy agent coming in under the guise of a military operation. These enemies from within are the most forceful and the most dangerous enemies that our nation has ever had to face, in my humble opinion. They have done it not over a period of 1 year or two, but over a century of period. It has been a generational war, purposely designed to change us from a republic to a socialistic world-involved state. In other words, a state subservient, giving up its individual sovereignty to a higher force. And I see that as in our present environment as we're being very close, on the brink of losing the major part of the sovereignty of this nation as a republic.
Don, I've been with you in a lot of meetings where we had various speakers and was dealing with various issues that concerned all of us. Unfortunately, when I look around, I discover that most of us are kind of like you and I, a little older than most. Here on the radio, we talk about our seniors today are young at heart and twice as smart. I think they're also much more involved. Maybe we recognize the danger. I wonder if our younger generation really understands the kind of threat. I mean, when you were in Vietnam or Cambodia or Laos or whatever, you knew who your enemy was. I'm wondering if our young people today understand who their enemy is and is taking this issue seriously, and if not, what do we do to wake them up?
Well, I really believe that the John Birch Society has had the answer for a lot of years. The society was founded in 1958 and for years was vilified as being a tin hat, way out right-wing organization. But in fact, they still exist today because they have told the truth. Truth withstands evil no matter what. It brings the light of day into the very essence of our lives. And what they have said all these years is that if we ever fall, it's going to be from within. The key is education. If we have an educated electorate, we will have people elected to office who will defend and stand for the things that this nation was founded upon. I find it very difficult to bring to the fore to our youngsters because of the dumbing down that they've had in a government school system. Our government schools don't teach history today the way it needs to be taught. Our children today don't have a clue, most of them, what World War II was about. They don't understand why Vietnam took place. They don't realize that there's never been a war since the end of World War II that wasn't done under the auspices in support of United Nations edicts. The United Nations resolutions that we've gone in to defend have never had a declaration of war properly done by the United States. So we're doing United Nations bidding to conduct warfare all over the globe that has nothing to do with the United States as a republic.
My concern is we not only not remember anything about World War II, even the more recent events and current events. I was talking to some college students the other day and said something about the Berlin Wall, and I saw this blank look on this young lady's face, and I said, "Honey, do you know what the Berlin Wall is?" And she said, "Well, no, I guess some kind of a wall in Berlin or something. I don't know." And I said, "Have you ever heard of the Iron Curtain?" And she said, "Well, no, not really." So there's got to be something that wakes them up. Maybe when a crisis comes, they may arise and shine and do the job that's got to be done, as the older generation did. But Don, I'll tell you what, I appreciate so much your coming in today to visit with us, to talk about these things, because your generation paid the price. And we are so thankful that we can enjoy the freedom and trust that the experiences will be shared with the next generation in such a way that when the crisis does come, there's going to be the old memories that will cause them to respond to the situation and face reality. If I have criticism of you old guys, it's that you haven't told us enough the stories about what's going on. And so that's why I was so glad to be able to have you come in today. I'm Glenn Howard, Senior World Radio. We've been visiting with Chief Master Sergeant Don Crosson, retired, who was with the Air Force Combat Controllers. Heroes indeed for the U.S. military, and thank God for them. Listen, if you've got somebody you'd like to recommend for us to interview, though, as one of our incredible seniors, give me a call, 877-875-0990. We'd like to talk to them. Hey, listen, it's been great being with you. Thanks so much for joining me. Be sure and tune in again this same time next week. Until then, be kind to everybody you know. Do something special for somebody, particularly yourself. See you next week. Bye-bye now.
I'm on the top of the world, looking down on creation, and the only explanation I can find